Hi everyone, my name is Ike Rakiecki and I'm a librarian in information services here at Mesa County Libraries. I hope you're all doing well and staying healthy and safe. What I'm going to be doing this morning is talking about a few ghost towns in Mesa County. I brought up a map of Mesa County, and this map is from the Mesa County Assessor's website. There are going to be 3 ghost towns that we'll be discussing. On this map, there are going to be 3 orange triangles. You're going to see one is just to the northeast of Grand Junction. That's going to be the first ghost town that we're going to be talking about, and that ghost town is Carpenter. Below that, and then to the left, you're going to see 2 other orange triangles that are located very close to each other. The triangle on the right is going to be another ghost town, and that's going to be Climax Camp. And the triangle to the left of that is Calamity Camp. Now, all of these ghost towns were related to mining here in Mesa County. And I think if you look back at the early history and, in history as it's proceeding, mining played a really important role. And I think that's definitely connected to why you still see these mining camps still around, in some cases over 100 years ago. Or, remnants of being 100 years old. Just as sort of a side note, the two orange triangles at the bottom, those are really close to Gateway, Colorado. But as far as Carpenter, you can see Grand Junction's right there below that. What I wanted to do right off the bat is, because all of these ghost towns are related to mining, I wanted to just talk very briefly, discuss a brief and concise timeline of mining in Colorado, but more specifically focusing on Mesa County. In 1859, coal mining first took place in Colorado. In 1881, the Utes were expelled to the reservations, and Grand Junction was incorporated in the summer of 1882. In 1888, the first commercial coal mining takes place in Mesa County. 1895, some of the Cameo and Palisade coal mines begin operation. And in 1911, carnotite ore is discovered on Calamity Mesa and Outlaw Mesa. And if you're not familiar with the term carnotite ore, carnotite is an ore that allowed humans to attain or to find both radium, vanadium, and uranium. From 1914 to 1923, radium mining takes place in the southwest part of the county. In 1941, a vanadium plant in Gateway begins operation, and in 1943, a vanadium plant begins operation in Grand Junction. In 1948, the Atomic Energy Commission, which at one point was based or headquartered here in Grand Junction, starts the domestic uranium procurement program. And in a lot of ways, that program helped sort of initiate the uranium boom of the 1950s. As far as details of the program went, the program guaranteed minimum prices for high-grade uranium. So in a lot of ways, that program, in addition to the need for uranium, that program really was played an important role in mining in Mesa County. In the early 1960s, though, the Atomic Energy Commission ends or stops the uranium procurement program. And while that didn't completely stop uranium mining in Mesa County, it definitely led to sort of a slowing down in that industry in Mesa County. The first ghost town that we're going to be talking about is the town of Carpenter, which is located northeast of Grand Junction. And it was actually founded by a man named W.T. Carpenter, or William Carpenter, as a place for coal miners to live. And W.T. Carpenter had actually came initially from Illinois, and he was a banker, investor, entrepreneur as well. What's interesting about the town of Carpenter is it connected, or I should say the Little Book Cliff Railway connected the town of Carpenter at the foot of the Book Cliffs all the way down to First Street in Grand Junction. And parts of that railroad, the Little Bookcliff Railroad, were still in place in the mid-1970s. And what happened, it sort of got rid of the remnants of that railroad, is there was an extension of Bookcliff Avenue. And because they did that construction, the rest of that railroad was removed, and it had no longer been in use for many years. While we're on the topic of Carpenter, I just want to briefly mention one of my favorite books. It focuses on the Little Bookcliff Railway in the town of Carpenter. It's called The Little Bookcliff Railway by Lyndon Lampert and Robert McLeod. It's not just about that railroad, and it's not just about coal mining, but it also talks a lot about the early development of the Grand Valley, Grand Junction, in the surrounding area. And really, as far as books on local history, I think the Little Bookcliff Railway has to be, at least in my opinion, one of the top 5. It's just very well researched and very well put together as far as books about local history go. What's interesting about Carpenter was that it was also known as Pollen or Poland Springs between 1892 and 1897. So there was a spring, as I mentioned, at the top of the canyon, and one of the side businesses, in addition to the coal mining, is that Carpenter bottled that water from the spring and then sold that as spring water or mineral water. Coal production was most successful between 1900 and 1910, but then began to slow. And in 1925, a fire in the Bookcliff mine permanently ended operations. There are still a handful of ruins at Carpenter today. A large retaining wall still stands, and it is in fairly good condition. So what we're looking at here is a photograph from approximately 1895 of the town of Carpenter. And you can see at the lower part of that photograph, there are a number of wooden buildings at that time that were still standing. There were 2 mines that were connected to Carpenter. The most well-known is the Bookcliff mine. The Bookcliff mine was located towards the left-hand side of that picture. And there was also the Grand Valley mine. The Grand Valley mine was located towards the right side of that photograph. So you had both the Bookcliff mine and the Grand Valley mine. This next photograph is one of the ruins at Carpenter. You can see that it's, not in the best of shape, but considering that it's been around and exposed to the elements for quite a long time, it's still standing and still doing fairly well. To me, this is a good representation of those ruins that you will find at Carpenter. You can see in 1907, an individual carved the year into this sandstone boulder. So this is that wall, that rock wall that is standing at Carpenter. Still, considering how long it's been exposed to the elements and how long it's been around, it's in pretty good shape, really. So these are 2 photographs. The photograph on the left-hand side is from roughly 1915, and it's a Frank Dean photograph. This photograph is of the Bookcliff mine. That's that historic image. On the right side, the picture on the right side is actually a modern day picture of that mine entrance. And it's interesting if you compare the 2, they're almost identical, really. On the opposite side of the canyon from where the Bookcliff mine was a prospect mine. And this is an image of the entrance of that prospect mine. The image on the left is of another one of those ruins at Carpenter. You can see that part of the wall is still standing. The roof is collapsed, but you still got a good portion of that wall that's still standing. The picture on the right is of a lower section of that retaining wall. The 2 other pictures on this next slide, the one is looking back at that ruin, and then the other one is another view of that retaining wall. I just thought it would be nice to give another, visual example. The two other photographs, the one on the left is actually looking back towards the town of Grand Junction. And you can see towards the lower right-hand corner of that image, you've got the grade of the Book Cliff Railroad. And so you could actually walk that all the way back to, the airport, and you're going to be able to follow the grade of the original Book Cliff Railroad. The picture on the right is looking back at what was once that town site of Carpenter. You can see that there's really not much there as far as those wooden buildings that were at one point still standing, that are now gone. What's interesting about the town of Carpenter is the city of Grand Junction, or the local residents, in a way almost forgot about Carpenter, or they at least sort of like it slipped out of that public conscious. In the 1960s, I believe 1960s or 1970s, there were two college students that were out jeeping out by the Book Cliffs, and they sort of happened upon Carpenter. They probably really didn't know that it was there. And when they happened upon that town, it was just like, wow, what is this? So it was sort of like Grand Junction's rediscovery of Carpenter. Okay, so moving on from Carpenter, we're going to be talking about, sort of in a chronological order, we're going to be moving forwards in time. We're going to be talking about the radium, vanadium, and uranium mining, which once again was very important and very crucial to the development and economy of Grand Junction and Mesa County. What I've got here is a map. I'm going to be showing, a few more maps through this presentation. We've got a map towards the upper left-hand corner. You can see where we've got the town of Gateway. We've got the Dolores River running down there near Gateway, which in a lot of ways, in most cases, parallels Highway 141. Towards the sort of upper center part of that map, you can see Tenderfoot Mesa. So you've got Tenderfoot Mesa, Calamity Mesa, Outlaw Mesa, and then Blue Mesa. Blue Mesa is at the very bottom, sort of going, butting up against that lower right-hand corner. On Tenderfoot Mesa, there was Tenderfoot Camp. On Calamity Mesa, there was Arrowhead Camp and Calamity Camp. And then on Outlaw Mesa, you had Climax Camp. And Climax Camp and Calamity Camp are going to be the two next ghost towns that we're going to be focusing on. Once again, I mentioned that radium, vanadium, and uranium mining. Those three different types of mining took place at Climax Camp and Calamity Camp. This next map over on the right side of that image is going to show you the furthest one to the right is Outlaw Mesa, and you can see we've got Climax Camp. And on Calamity Mesa, you're going to see the New Verde Mines, Calamity Camp, and then Arrowhead Camp. And there are two other images towards the lower left-hand corner where you can see the Colorado and Utah state line, and this area is right there along that state line. As sort of as a visual illustration, I have included two, or actually three 1960 United States Geological Survey topographic maps. The one in the upper left-hand corner is showing you Arrowhead Camp and then the Arrowhead Mines. Below that, we've got Climax Camp and then the Outlaw Mines. And then in the map, or the image towards the upper right-hand corner, we've got Calamity Camp and then all of those Calamity Mines. So you can see that there was quite a bit of activity going on in this area as far as mining goes. So Climax Camp, as I mentioned, is located on Outlaw Mesa, just outside of the Uncompahgre National Forest. Once again, radium, vanadium, and uranium was mined there. Prospecting and mining began around 1910. Several rushes and slowdowns occurring in the mining in that area. Most of it took place between 1915 and 1970. And there are still a handful of buildings standing at Climax Camp to this day. This next image is showing you Climax Camp, probably between the 50s to the 1960s. You can see that there are a number of buildings. at that camp at that time. This next image is an aerial image from the Mesa County Assessor site showing you Climax Camp. You can see that there are going to be 2 buildings, also a pond in that area. This is another image of what looks to be probably some cement pads. I've actually been up to Climax Camp, but I haven't explored that area. But you can definitely see that there are some structures there. There are some sort of outlying buildings at Climax Camp. This next aerial image shows you 2 buildings that are probably, I would say, maybe a quarter of a mile from Climax Camp. So this is an image looking towards Climax Camp. On the left-hand side, you can see a geological formation. That's called Potato Mountain. What's interesting is in the 1990s, I grew up in Grand Junction. So in the 1990s, my dad and I had spent a lot of time up in this area, camping and hiking and whatnot. We spent quite a bit of time on Outlaw Mesa and Calamity Mesa. And that's really what sort of piqued my interest in this area. Is like, wow, I was born in 1979. When I was younger, I really didn't know about the uranium mining in this area and how important it was. And I would ask my house, like, what are these buildings? What are these camps? And he was like, oh, those were uranium mining camps. And I was like, wow. So it sort of, as a young person, it sort of really piqued my interest, and it was always there ever since I was in high school. We had actually visited Climax Camp, and you can see towards the center there are 2 apricot trees that have been fenced off. I'm assuming fenced off to keep the deer away. I remembered seeing vividly those 2 apricot trees back in the 1990s. So some friends and I, a couple years ago, went back to Climax Camp. And what's pretty cool is you can still see that those apricot trees are still there and they're doing pretty well. So this next image is of one of those structures, sort of like a cabin at Climax Camp. You can see that there is a barbecue grill there as well. This next image is probably the shop, the mechanic shop at Climax Camp. The image on the left is of a bicycle hanging at that mechanic shop. And the next image is an interior photograph of that shop. And what's neat is you can see those things like that little bicycle as a reminder, a visual, tangible reminder that the town, the ghost town of Climax was at one point, an energetic place where people lived and worked and raised families. And, there was just a lifeblood in that town, that mining town. So these next 2 images, we've got a photograph on the the left, which is an interior shot of that shop. And the image on the right is of a little cement stoop, but then you can see that at one point there was a building standing next to that stoop. We've got, looks to be a root cellar there on the left. And then on the right, we have one of the larger structures standing at Climax Camp. This is a close-up of that larger structure. You can see that there's sort of a fenced-in little patio area. What's interesting is if you go back and look at the mining history in Mesa County and also Montrose County, you're going to come across an individual named John Pegleg Foster. And Pegleg Foster was an early miner, prospector, probably a rancher as well in that area. Pegleg Foster, he had claimed that Outlaw Mesa was named after him. But you're going to find that Foster name connected to mining in this area going back quite a ways in time. And there's actually a little sign at this building, at the door of this building, signed from the Carpenters. It says, feel free to come and visit. Just make sure you close the door when you leave. So the next town that we're going to be talking about is Calamity Camp. So Calamity Camp is located on Calamity Mesa. What's different about Calamity Camp, and which makes it sort of unique in this regard, is that Calamity Camp is on the National Register of Historic Places. So it can be a little bit easier to find and get to than the two previous ghost towns that I talked about. Mining took place at Calamity Camp from 1913 to the mid-1960s. Several buildings have been partially restored, and there's also a good number of buildings that are still in their original condition. The Calamity Camp is located within walking distance of the New Verde mines, and there are also a couple buildings at the New Verde mines. And mining at New Verde actually took place relatively late as far as compared to the other camps. There was mining activity taking place at New Verde up until the late 1970s. So what I've got here is an aerial image of Calamity Camp. It'd be a little bit hard to make out, but towards the lower center part of the image, you're going to see a couple buildings. And this next image, so Calamity Camp is towards the upper right-hand corner. Then you're going to go down towards the lower left-hand corner. You're going to see a couple structures down there, and those are the New Verde mine buildings. There's sort of a little gully, and that's that sort of light green colored area. This next image is a map from roughly 1922 indicating houses, shacks, and other structures at Calamity Camp. But you can see that there was quite a bit as far as structures that are located at that camp. We've got a couple other images from Calamity Camp. We've got a building where they would have kept livestock, and then also another building on the right, which you can see is in pretty, it's in ruin, it's falling apart. Which makes sense because it's been exposed to the elements for a very long time. The next slide, that image on the left, is one of those buildings that has been partially restored. And you can see that some of the wood holding that roof up is new. So they restored, I think, about 3 or 4 of those buildings, partially restored at Calamity Camp. The image on the right is of the, somewhat ubiquitous outhouse at ghost towns you will often find. This next image is showing you the interior of one of the cabins at Calamity Camp. And the next 4 images are some of the items that you can find if you're actually at Calamity Camp. The image in the upper left-hand corner is the handle of a shovel. Below that, you're going to see an image of a little safety pin. The image in the lower right-hand corner is of a plate. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you have a couple pieces of historic glass. Different colors like blue and purple and often green. The next image is of one of those windows at Calamity Camp, just some of those other items that you will find. And we've got this big cement pad here at Calamity Camp, and you can see that some individuals carved their names or their initials into that cement pad in the year 1948. Some of the other items that you'll find as far as equipment at Calamity Camp. And this is a big pile of, rock or ore that they did not use at Calamity Camp. At Calamity Camp, there were a handful of mines, probably between 5 to 10, and one of those mines was actually located right below or underneath that pile. So in 1926, we can see in this little rock, the sandstone rock part of this wall, that someone carved the year 1926 into there. So these next 2 images are looking across from Calamity Camp over to that New Verde camp. You can see that little gully on the image on the left, and the image on the right is from one of those buildings at New Verde camp. Got another image from New Verde camp of one of those structures, and then as you look past that structure, you're going to see Blue Mesa. 2 years ago, there was actually some major concern. There was that big wildfire that started down there by Nucla, Colorado. It would spread a good ways onto or near Blue Mesa. And I know that there was a lot of concern about that fire potentially damaging or destroying some of those historic mining camps. This next image is of an absolutely gigantic air compressor located at New Verde Camp. And it's actually, to visually put this into perspective, it would take up, almost the entire size of someone's, I'd say the average size of a garage at someone's house. Just the fact that they got this air compressor up there. You're talking about Calamity Mesa being essentially out there in the middle of nowhere, way up above Gateway, outside of the Uncompahgre National Forest. You've got these dirt roads that were often probably not in the best of shape, and just the manpower and the money and the investment that would have been taken to get that air compressor up there, because it's actually absolutely humongous. These next two images, there's a picture on the left showing you a little set of ladder or steps that someone constructed. And then we've got a big tank for probably storing water at the New Verde camp. So these next two images are showing us a map or a section of a map from Paradox Valley. And these are from, once again, the United States Geological Survey topographic maps. You can see that in this first image, there are 5 different radium mining camps. And often they'll have very colorful names like Thunderbolt Camp, Joe Dandy Camp, Fawn Springs Camp. This next image is another section of that map from 1915. You'll find other camps like Shamrock Camp, even Hieroglyphic Camp. Hieroglyphic Camp was located near Hieroglyphic Canyon, and sort of a curious name of hieroglyphic. And that canyon had actually gotten its name from Native American pictographs that were located in that canyon. So when I first saw that on a map, I was like, wait a second, what's Hieroglyphic Camp in western Colorado? Actually had to do from material remains of the Native Americans. It actually looked at the entire map of Paradox Valley, and there were over 20 camps in 1915. And I think that just shows to me how important that mining was and how much activity was going on to have that many camps down there. And in a lot of cases, these camps may not have been as big or as well developed as Calamity Camp was. It may have only been maybe a cabin or two or maybe a couple tents. But regardless, once again, it shows to me how important and how much activity was going on. That's about it as far as I have. I hope everyone has enjoyed this, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.